Right in the middle of Lily's graduation, I felt my entire world collapse. Jason, my husband of 12 years, leaned in with that cold look in his eyes and said he was leaving me. The words hit like a punch I didn't see coming. Families around us turned, whispers rippling through the crowd, and I could see Lily freeze, her proud smile fading into confusion. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to breathe. For a moment, I just stared at him, trying to make sense of what I had just heard. After all these years, all the memories we built together, and he chose this moment, my daughter's big day, to announce the end. It was cruel, shocking, and humiliating. I could feel the heat of every gaze, judgment and pity mixing in ways I didn't want to think about. But something inside me clicked. I realized he wasn't going to control my reaction this time. I looked at Lily, her small hands clutching her diploma, her eyes wide with confusion. She had worked so hard for this moment, and I refused to let Jason ruin it. I whispered to her, "It's your day, honey. Shine like you always do." She nodded, her fingers tightening around mine, and I felt a surge of strength. That's when I calmly did something Jason did not expect. I smiled. Not a weak smile, but a quiet, steady smile that said I wasn't broken. The shock on his face was immediate. He opened his mouth, trying to shout, trying to make me react the way he wanted, but I didn't. I stayed composed, and the crowd sensed it. He started screaming, his voice rising in anger, but it only made him look small, desperate, and ridiculous. Everyone was staring at him now, not me. In that moment, I realized how powerful calm could be against chaos. After the ceremony, I held Lily's hand tightly as we walked through the crowd. People gave me sympathetic looks, but I didn't feel small. Jason tried to follow, yelling my name, but I kept walking. Inside, I was furious, but I didn't let it show. I knew that anger wouldn't help me. Instead, I focused on Lily, on celebrating her achievements, and on reclaiming control over my life. By the time we got home, the adrenaline had settled, and I sat in silence for a while, thinking about everything. Jason's betrayal was glaring, but so was my strength. I wasn't going to let his actions define me. I realized then that sometimes, the moment that feels like the end is actually the beginning. The beginning of standing up, reclaiming dignity, and showing that no one, not even someone who promised to love you forever, can take your power unless you let them. In that moment, I promised myself that I would rise from this, not with anger, but with strategy, patience, and quiet confidence. Jason had made his choice. Now it was time for me to make mine. From the outside, our marriage looked normal. People would say Jason and I had it all together, but behind closed doors, things were different. Jason had a way of controlling without it being obvious. He decided what we ate, where we went, and even how I spent my time. At first, I thought it was care, but over time, it felt suffocating. He rarely asked how I felt about anything, and when I did share, he dismissed my feelings as overreactions. There were little signs early on that I ignored. The way he would disappear for hours without explanation, the vague excuses about work, the phone calls he would take privately. I brushed it off, telling myself I was imagining things. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Those feelings of unease grew over the years, like a storm brewing quietly in the distance. Jason also had a habit of criticizing my choices. If I wanted to take a new class, he would find a reason it was unnecessary. If I bought something small for the house or for Lily, he would make a comment that made me feel guilty. It wasn't just about the criticism, it was the way he made me question myself, always leaving me unsure if I was too sensitive or unreasonable. Over time, that quiet control eroded my confidence, and I began doubting my own judgment. Lily, of course, noticed things, even though she was young. She would ask me why her dad seemed upset sometimes or why he looked distant when she told him about her day. I would brush it off, not wanting to upset her, but I could see it in her eyes, the worry and confusion. Children pick up on tension, even when parents try to hide it, and I hated that she was sensing this between us. It made everything feel heavier because I wanted to protect her from the storm I was living in. The tension in the house had a rhythm. Quiet mornings, loud disagreements over nothing, and nights where Jason would retreat to his office, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I began keeping mental notes, remembering every small lie, every moment I felt dismissed, every time he crossed boundaries. I didn't know yet what I would do with those memories, but I knew I needed to hold on to them. Despite the neglect and control, I kept hoping Jason would change, that the man I married, the one who once promised to be my partner, would return. But deep down, I knew that ignoring the signs would only lead to heartbreak. The walls of our marriage had cracks I couldn't ignore anymore, and every day, I felt the weight of betrayal creeping closer, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself.
It was the day I had been dreading, but never imagined it would happen like this. Jason stood there in front of all our family and friends and said words that cut deeper than anything I had felt before. He wanted a divorce. He claimed I wasn't what he signed up for, that I had somehow failed him after all these years. The sting of those words wasn't just in what he said, but in how he chose to say them, during Lily's graduation, with everyone watching. I felt a rush of heat to my face, but I forced myself to stay calm. I could see the shock on my family's faces, the confusion in Lily's eyes, and I knew that any reaction from me would only give him the satisfaction he seemed to crave. So I stood there, holding my head high, letting the humiliation roll off me like water. It wasn't easy. Every nerve in my body screamed, but I refused to let him see me break. What made it worse was knowing the truth beneath his words. Jason's life had been filled with secrets for a long time. While I poured myself into our marriage and our daughter, he had been secretly involved with someone else. I had suspected it before, the late nights, the unexplained absences, the constant defensiveness, but now it was undeniable. His hypocrisy was astounding. He painted me as the problem while hiding the very betrayal he was accusing me of causing. The timing was cruel beyond measure. Choosing Lily's graduation, the day we celebrated her achievements, to announce the end of our marriage was a calculated blow. It was as if he wanted to maximize my pain, to show that my happiness didn't matter. I could see the hurt in Lily's eyes, and it broke me in ways words couldn't describe. But I couldn't let him ruin this day completely. I had to find strength I didn't know I still had. As he continued, raising his voice and trying to dominate the situation, I kept my composure. I realized that his anger and need for control were weaknesses, not power. I could see through the mask he wore so easily around others, and it gave me a strange clarity. This was not just a divorce, it was a revelation of the man I had married. I understood now that his timing, his lies, and his public attack were about him, not me. Even in that moment of betrayal, I began to feel a quiet determination. I wouldn't allow his actions to define me or dictate my worth. Jason may have tried to humiliate me in front of everyone, but he underestimated my ability to remain calm, collected, and aware of my own strength. The seeds of his downfall were quietly planted that day, though he didn't yet know it. I realized that while he had chosen this moment for maximum pain, it would also be the moment I began reclaiming my life. After the ceremony, I went home feeling hollow. Lily was safe with her grandparents for the evening, and I had the house to myself. The silence was heavy, but instead of collapsing into despair, I let my thoughts settle. I thought about the years of marriage, the moments of quiet neglect, the little lies, and the hidden betrayals. For the first time, I acknowledged something I had been avoiding. I was stronger than I had given myself credit for. Jason might have tried to break me, but he had only awakened a part of me that refused to be crushed. Sitting in my living room, I started going through everything that I could remember: financial records, old messages, suspicious transactions, and small inconsistencies in his stories. Each note, each paper, each memory became a piece of the bigger picture. I realized that the betrayals were not isolated incidents, they were part of a pattern. Jason had been manipulative for years, and now it was time for me to use that knowledge to regain control of my life. I reached out to Claire, my best friend since college, who had always been my sounding board and supporter. She listened patiently as I recounted what had happened, and when I explained my plan to gather evidence and prepare for what was ahead, she didn't judge or hesitate. She agreed to help quietly, helping me keep track of documents and offering practical advice. Her support reminded me that I wasn't alone, and that gave me courage. As I worked that evening, I felt a strange mix of emotions, pain, anger, and determination, but also clarity. I understood that my revenge wouldn't be about public humiliation or petty retaliation, it would be about proving to myself that I could rise above the betrayal. It would be strategic, smart, and undeniable. Every document I filed, every memory I wrote down, became a tool, a step toward regaining my power and dignity. I also took time to reflect on my own worth. I thought about Lily and the example I wanted to set for her: strength, intelligence, and grace under pressure. I didn't want her to see her mother broken or bitter. I wanted her to see that even when life throws the worst betrayal at you, it's possible to respond with courage and clarity. By the end of the night, I had a folder with evidence, notes on key events, and a plan forming in my mind. Jason had tried to destroy me emotionally, but in reality, he had only pushed me to awaken a side of myself I hadn't fully acknowledged. I felt a quiet sense of power building inside me, the kind that doesn't need shouting or drama. With Claire by my side, I knew I could face whatever came next. The calm had settled in, but beneath it, a quiet determination was growing, a determination that would not only protect me but also ensure that Jason's betrayal would no longer have any control over my life.
Jason seemed to think that I would collapse the moment he announced his plans. He expected me to beg, to plead, or to break down completely. I could almost see it in his eyes, the smug look, the confidence that I was powerless. He walked around the house with an air of triumph, talking loudly about his freedom and how he could finally live without me. Every word he spoke, every gesture, was meant to make me feel small and desperate. But I didn't react the way he wanted. I stayed calm, distant, and collected. I answered him politely when necessary, but I didn't show panic, hurt, or desperation. That calmness seemed to confuse him. I noticed his frustration grow when I didn't crumble or beg. His arrogance made him blind to what was happening around him. He couldn't see that my mind was already several steps ahead, planning carefully, observing, and noting every detail of his behavior. Jason's new sense of freedom became his own undoing. He flaunted it openly, speaking about dates, social events, and the life he imagined he could have without responsibility. He didn't realize that by doing so, he was giving me more insight into his habits, his weaknesses, and the secrets he thought I didn't notice. Each careless word, every boast, became part of the puzzle I was quietly assembling. I stayed emotionally intelligent in the face of his manipulation. While he tried to provoke reactions from me, I refused to give him the satisfaction. I reminded myself that his actions were predictable, and my control over my own emotions gave me power he didn't have. I watched him make mistakes, underestimate me, and believe that he held all the cards. Even as he paraded his arrogance, I focused on my own goals. I kept organizing evidence, making careful notes, and thinking about the steps I would take to protect myself and Lily. I wasn't acting impulsively, I was planning strategically. I knew that any reaction from me that appeared desperate would only strengthen his sense of control, so I stayed measured and deliberate in every move. At times, I would listen silently as he ranted or bragged, feeling a quiet satisfaction that I was not the one losing control. The more arrogant he became, the more he exposed himself, and the clearer it became to me that my next steps would be decisive. I didn't need drama or confrontation, my advantage lay in patience, observation, and knowing when to act. By the end of each day, Jason's arrogance left him drained and frustrated, while I felt stronger and more focused. His attempts at manipulation were no match for my clarity and determination. I understood now that true power wasn't loud or aggressive, it was quiet, controlled, and informed. And with that power, I was ready to move forward on my own terms. As I continued looking deeper into our shared life, I began to notice things that didn't add up. Financial statements showed gaps, transfers that were never explained, and accounts I had never been told about. At first, my hands shook as I reviewed the numbers, but soon the fear faded and focus took over. This wasn't about revenge driven by anger. This was about truth and protection. Every discovery made the picture clearer and confirmed that Jason had been hiding more than just emotions. I moved carefully, making sure I understood everything before taking any steps. I didn't confront him or let on that I knew anything. Instead, I organized documents, timelines, and records quietly. Each hidden account and unexplained expense was proof of how calculated his behavior had been. I realized that his confidence came from believing I was unaware and unprepared. That belief was his biggest mistake. Rather than exposing him publicly or creating drama, I chose a smarter path. I wanted the truth to surface in the right place, at the right time, without hurting Lily or damaging my own integrity. I consulted professionals discreetly, asked the right questions, and learned where I stood legally and financially. Knowledge became my strongest weapon, and with every answer I received, my confidence grew. Small victories began to appear. Jason started noticing changes he couldn't explain. Documents he expected to control were no longer entirely in his hands. Conversations shifted, and his tone changed. He became cautious, less sure of himself, and more defensive. I could see it in the way he paused before speaking, the way his certainty began to crack. He was starting to realize that I wasn't as powerless as he had assumed. What satisfied me most wasn't watching him struggle, it was knowing that I was handling everything with dignity. I didn't raise my voice or lash out. I didn't seek sympathy or validation. I stayed focused, calm, and deliberate. My actions weren't fueled by bitterness, but by self-respect. I wasn't trying to destroy him, I was protecting myself and my future. As the days passed, I felt stronger and more in control. The fear that once weighed heavily on me had transformed into clarity. I understood now that revenge didn't have to be loud or cruel. Sometimes, it's simply about standing firm, making informed choices, and letting someone face the consequences of their own actions. Jason's growing unease confirmed what I already knew: he had underestimated me. He thought I would react emotionally, but instead, I responded intelligently. That realization unsettled him more than any argument ever could. And through it all, I kept my dignity intact, knowing that when everything finally came to light, I would walk away not only free, but proud of how I handled it. A week later, I arranged a small family dinner at home, inviting only Lily and Jason. On the surface, it looked normal, a quiet evening together, but inside, I was ready. I wasn't looking for an argument or drama, I was ready to face Jason with the truth, calm and prepared. As we sat down, I started speaking slowly and deliberately, choosing every word carefully. I told him that I knew about the hidden accounts, the secret transactions, and the lies he had built over the years. I didn't shout or accuse loudly, I stated facts, quietly and clearly, letting them sink in. I could see him stiffen, a flicker of panic crossing his face, but I continued without hesitation. Jason's reaction was immediate. His usual arrogance cracked as he began stammering, trying to deny what I was saying. When that failed, he started yelling, his voice rising, but this time, I didn't flinch. The room felt heavy with tension, yet I remained composed. Every word I spoke, every fact I presented, reinforced the role reversal from the graduation ceremony. Now he was the one exposed, vulnerable, and out of control. He shouted, his face red, but I stayed calm, meeting his panic with quiet confidence. I could see the embarrassment setting in, not just for him, but for the situation he had created. He had expected me to plead, to beg, to crumble, but instead, I had remained steady, intelligent, and unshaken. The more he yelled, the smaller he seemed. Lily sat quietly, watching her father unravel. I made sure to maintain my composure for her sake, showing her that strength doesn't come from anger or shouting, but from clarity and self-control. I wanted her to understand that even when someone betrays you or tries to manipulate you, you can respond with intelligence and dignity. By the end of the evening, Jason's shouting had died down, replaced with awkward silence. He couldn't regain the upper hand because I had already taken control, not through aggression, but through preparation, knowledge, and calm delivery. I had revealed his betrayal and arrogance without losing myself in the process. After the confrontation, I felt a quiet satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake, it was about reclaiming power over my life and setting boundaries that he could no longer ignore. Jason had underestimated me, and in that moment, it became painfully clear to him. I had shown that calm intelligence could outmatch emotional explosions, and the lesson was undeniable. For the first time, I felt truly in control of the situation. I wasn't acting out of anger or desperation. I was acting strategically, and it worked. Jason had finally faced the consequences of his choices, and I had proven to myself that I could handle betrayal with strength, dignity, and quiet power. After the confrontation, I felt a sense of relief and clarity I hadn't known in years. The weight of betrayal and humiliation had been lifted, leaving space for me to focus on rebuilding my life. I started exploring new opportunities, taking steps I had put off for too long. I enrolled in courses I had always wanted to try and reconnected with passions I had ignored while managing the household. Each small achievement reminded me of my worth and capability. Lily noticed the changes in me almost immediately. She saw me wake up each morning with determination, approach challenges with confidence, and pursue goals with focus. She watched as I handled difficult situations with calm intelligence rather than anger or despair. Her admiration and trust in me grew, and our bond deepened in ways that made my heart full. She began to rely on me not just as a mother, but as an example of strength and resilience. I also began to take care of myself in ways I had neglected for years. I made time for hobbies, physical activity, and quiet reflection. Each choice reinforced my independence and reminded me that my life was not defined by Jason's betrayal. I discovered joy in small victories and found satisfaction in creating a life that reflected my own values and desires rather than someone else's expectations. Through this process, I reflected on everything that had happened. The betrayal had been painful, but it had also forced me to recognize my own power. I didn't just survive, I transformed the situation into a source of strength. I realized that the pain Jason caused could have broken me, or it could teach me to rise above. I chose the latter. Meanwhile, Jason's influence in our lives diminished. He tried to assert control, but it was clear he had lost respect and trust. His attempts to reconnect or manipulate were met with polite firmness or quiet refusal. Lily understood, and I never allowed his presence to overshadow the life we were rebuilding together. The loss he felt was a natural consequence of his choices. He had underestimated the resilience he thought he could crush. Every day, I felt stronger, more confident, and more aligned with my own values. I celebrated Lily's successes, shared laughter and quiet moments, and focused on building a future where betrayal no longer had power over us. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and I was finally living it fully. By the end of this period, I knew that true redemption wasn't about revenge or proving anything to Jason, it was about reclaiming my self-worth, creating stability for Lily, and embracing my own strength. I had turned betrayal into an opportunity to grow, to teach my daughter resilience, and to show that dignity and self-respect are far more powerful than anger or humiliation. I had not only survived, I had become unstoppable. Months after the confrontation, a surprising piece of information reached me quietly. Jason's secret lover, the woman he had hidden his feelings for, turned out to be unreliable and manipulative. I had suspected that his choice wasn't as perfect as he imagined, and now the truth was unfolding on its own. She had her own agenda, and the life Jason thought he would find with her began to unravel. I didn't need to intervene or create drama. My careful planning and understanding of the situation had already set the stage. By staying calm and observing, I allowed events to reveal themselves naturally. Jason began to struggle, facing challenges he hadn't anticipated. The person he had counted on for happiness turned out to be just as unstable and self-serving as he had been. Quietly, the consequences of his choices started to appear, and I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, not from cruelty, but from seeing that truth and accountability have a way of balancing themselves. Watching this unfold, I realized how far I had come. I no longer felt anger toward him or the situation. I had built a life of dignity and strength while he faced the consequences of his impulsive decisions. My revenge had never been about hurting him directly, it had been about reclaiming my life and ensuring that his underestimation of me didn't go unpunished. Karma, in its own way, had done what I had carefully planned in my mind without needing to act out of malice. Even as Jason struggled to stabilize his life, I remained unshaken. My priorities were clear: Lily, my career, and my own happiness. I continued to grow, focusing on what mattered and leaving the chaos of his choices behind. Each step I took reinforced the lesson that revenge doesn't have to be loud, cruel, or public. Strategy, patience, and self-respect are far more powerful than anger or rash action. Lily noticed too. She saw her father's disappointment and confusion, and she also saw her mother's calm and strength. It became another lesson for her: life may be unfair, people may betray you, but dignity and intelligence can turn even the worst situations into opportunities. My quiet composure showed her that strength isn't measured by shouting or revenge, but by clarity, planning, and integrity. By the time Jason fully realized that his new relationship wouldn't bring him happiness, it was clear that his world had shifted. He had lost the respect and trust that once gave him power, while I had gained confidence, independence, and control. My life was full of meaningful accomplishments and joy, and I didn't need to boast or retaliate. The final twist was subtle but satisfying. Jason had made choices that reflected his true character, and the consequences unfolded without any intervention from me. I remained calm, unshaken, and free. I had proven that the best revenge isn't about cruelty or chaos, it's about standing strong, thinking ahead, and living a life that reflects your worth. Looking back, I realized how much the betrayal had changed me, not in a way that broke me, but in a way that made me stronger. For years, I had measured myself by Jason's opinions, trying to meet expectations that were never fair. His departure and lies forced me to confront my own strength, my own worth, and my own ability to rise above difficult situations. I learned that sometimes the strongest response isn't screaming, fighting, or lashing out, it's walking away smarter, calmer, and more confident than ever. Lily watched every step of this journey. She saw me face betrayal without losing my dignity, make decisions with clarity, and rebuild our lives with determination. I knew she would carry these lessons with her forever. She learned that real strength doesn't come from controlling others, but from understanding yourself, standing up for what's right, and living with integrity. Watching her grow into a young girl who admires resilience in her mother gave me a sense of fulfillment that no argument or confrontation ever could. As for Jason, his future remained uncertain. He had made choices that reflected his true character, and now he faced the consequences. I felt no need to gloat or interfere. His loss of respect, trust, and influence was the natural result of his own actions. I had no interest in revisiting old wounds or trying to control the outcome. My focus was entirely on the life I was creating for myself and Lily, a life of independence, confidence, and emotional freedom. I embraced new opportunities, pursued passions I had neglected, and created a home filled with love, stability, and purpose. Each small step reinforced my belief in my own resilience and capabilities. I realized that betrayal, while painful, does not define a person. What defines us is how we respond. Choosing clarity over anger, patience over impulsiveness, and dignity over revenge allowed me to transform a painful chapter into a foundation for growth. Reflecting on the journey, I felt a quiet sense of empowerment. I no longer carried the weight of humiliation or fear. I had faced deception, manipulation, and heartbreak, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more self-assured. My life was now fully my own, and I had reclaimed control over my happiness, my choices, and my family. The story didn't end with dramatic confrontations or revenge, it ended with calm, thoughtful strength. I had proven to myself that betrayal doesn't have the power to destroy someone unless they allow it. My confidence and composure became the ultimate response, showing that true empowerment comes from within. In the end, I walked forward unshaken, knowing that life could throw challenges at me, but my response would always define the outcome. Betrayal may have been part of my story, but it no longer controlled it. I had written my own ending, one of strength, dignity, and unwavering self-respect.